I never thought the people who raised me were capable of such pure, calculated evil until the day I found the mahogany box hidden behind a false wall in the basement. And inside wasn't just my birth certificate, but a check for $2 million made out to my guardians for the successful relocation and silent upbringing of a child that wasn't theirs. I spent 21 years being treated like a live-in servant, sleeping in a room that was essentially a walk-in closet, and eating leftovers while their biological son, Julian, was draped in designer clothes and handed the keys to a brand new car on his 16th birthday. But finding out that my entire life of misery was actually a paid subscription for my own kidnapping broke something inside of me that can never be fixed. I am sitting here today, finally free, but with a heavy heart and a story that sounds like a Hollywood thriller. Yet every agonizing second of it was my reality, so I have to ask you straight up before I get into the details. If you found out your entire identity was a lie bought and paid for by the people you called mom and dad, would you burn their world down, or would you walk away and never look back? To understand how I got to that basement, you have to understand the hell I grew up in, which started for as long as my memory goes back in a cold, suburban house where I was always the outsider looking through a fogged window at a family I wasn't part of. Richard and Sarah were the parents. And from the age of 5, I was given a chore list that would make a Victorian chimney sweep tired while Julian was allowed to play video games and throw tantrums that were rewarded with toys. I was told I was a charity case, an orphan they took in out of the kindness of their hearts after my druggy parents abandoned me at a bus station. A lie they hammered into my skull every time I cried or asked why I didn't have a birthday party like Julian. I grew up believing I was trash, someone lucky to even have a roof over his head, so I worked twice as hard to earn a shred of affection that never came, scrubbing floors until my knees bled and maintaining a 4.0 GPA, just so Richard wouldn't have an excuse to raise his hand to me. Sarah was worse in a way because her cruelty was quiet. She would cook these elaborate Sunday roasts and tell me I could have the scraps once the real family was done, making me wait in the kitchen like a stray dog while I heard their laughter from the dining room. I remember one specific Thanksgiving when I was 10 years old. They bought Julian a mountain bike, and they gave me a pair of used socks they said they found in a donation bin. They made me sit at a small card table in the hallway while they ate turkey in the dining room, telling me that people like me should be grateful for the smell of a home-cooked meal. Every time I tried to join a conversation or ask about my past, Richard's face would turn a shade of purple I've never seen on another human being, and he'd tell me that my real parents didn't want me because I was a mistake they couldn't wait to erase. That kind of mental conditioning stays with you. It makes you small, it makes you quiet, and it makes you believe that you deserve the dirt under your fingernails. I spent countless nights staring at the ceiling of my closet-sized room, wondering what I had done in a past life to deserve such hatred, not realizing that my very existence was a paycheck they were cashing every single day. I remember the time I got sick with a high fever when I was 12, and instead of taking me to a doctor, Richard told me to stop faking it for attention, and made me shovel the driveway in a blizzard. I coughed until my chest burned, but I did it because the alternative was a week without food. They didn't just want a servant. They wanted to break my spirit so completely that I would never have the courage to look for the truth. As I got older, the resentment grew, but so did my suspicion because I looked nothing like them, which they explained away by saying I took after my low-life biological father. Yet I noticed Richard would get incredibly jumpy whenever a police car drove through the neighborhood, or when I asked too many questions about the adoption paperwork for school. When I needed my birth certificate for a driver's permit, they lost it, claiming it was destroyed in a house fire that never happened, and forced me to wait until I was 18 to get a state-issued ID under their strict supervision. I started noticing small things, like how Sarah would hide the newspaper whenever there was a story about a missing person, or how they refused to ever let me take a DNA test for a school project, claiming that genetics don't matter as much as the roof over your head. When I turned 21, I was still living there, working 2 jobs to save up enough to escape, but they demanded rent that took up 80% of my paycheck, effectively keeping me trapped in their service. I was working 12-hour shifts at a warehouse and then coming home to mow the lawn, paint the fence, and wash Richard's car, all while Julian was away at a prestigious university that I was unknowingly paying for with my stolen life. The psychological toll of being told you are a burden while being the primary engine that keeps their household running is something you can't describe unless you've lived it. I would see them post family photos on social media where they had cropped me out, or worse, forced me to take the photo so they could look like the perfect trio. I began to notice that Richard would spend hours in the basement, locking the door behind him, and emerging with a smug grin that made my skin crawl. One night, I heard them arguing in the kitchen about the contract, and how the payments were going to stop once I reached 25. I didn't understand what they meant then, but the fear in Sarah's voice was unmistakable. The breaking point came during a heavy rainstorm that caused the basement to flood, and Richard, too lazy to do the work himself, ordered me down there to move his heavy oak filing cabinets before the water ruined his important documents. The basement was always off limits to me. It was the one place in the house where the door was always double locked, and I was told it was because of black mold that would kill me if I breathed it in. As I was lugging a heavy crate through the ankle-deep water, I slipped on the slick floor and slammed into a section of the wood paneling that sounded hollow, and when I pushed against it out of curiosity, a small door popped open to reveal a hidden compartment. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird as I reached into that dark space and pulled out the mahogany box, clicking the latch open to find a series of letters, a hospital bracelet with the name, Ethan Vance, and that sickening check that proved I was stolen from a wealthy family in a neighboring state over 2 decades ago. There were also photos, real photos, of a beautiful couple holding a baby with the same eyes I see in the mirror every morning. The letters were from a private investigator Richard had hired years ago to make sure the search had gone cold, confirming that my real parents, the Vances, had never stopped looking for me and had even offered a massive reward that Richard and Sarah were too terrified to claim because it would mean prison. I found a ledger where Richard had meticulously tracked every cent of the $2 million, noting how much he spent on Julian's private school, their vacation home, and the very luxury cars I was forced to wash every Saturday morning. I stood there in the rising muddy water, clutching the proof of my stolen life, feeling a level of rage that felt like liquid fire in my veins, realizing that every no I ever heard and every meal I missed was a choice they made while sitting on a fortune they got for ruining me. It wasn't just about the money, it was the sheer calculation of it all. They had a checklist for my silent upbringing, which included things like minimal social interaction, no extracurricular activities, and reinforce orphan status monthly. They had literally turned my life into a business model, and I was the commodity being depreciated every single year. So that is the nightmare I was living. And at that moment, standing in a flooded basement with the truth in my hands, I realized I had the power to destroy the only life I had ever known. I was shaking, not from the cold water, but from the sheer weight of the betrayal that had just been dropped into my lap. Before I tell you how I tracked down the Vances and the absolute carnage I unleashed on Richard and Sarah, I want you to pause right now and go to the comments. Tell me, would you have called the police immediately? Or would you have played it slow to make sure they suffered as much as you did? I decided on a slow, agonizing burn because a quick arrest was too good for them, so I hid the box in my car and spent the next week acting like the same submissive orphan they expected, though every time Sarah smiled at me, I felt like I was going to vomit. I started doing my own investigation at night, using the library's computers so they couldn't track my search history. I found old news clips from 2005 about the Vance baby kidnapping. It was a national story. My biological father, David Vance, was a tech mogul, and my mother, Eleanor, was a renowned surgeon. They were at a charity gala when I was snatched from my nursery by someone they thought was a trusted staff member. Seeing the photos of my mother's devastated face in those old articles broke me all over again. I was secretly contacting a high-end law firm using the names I found in the documents, and the lawyer I spoke to was so horrified by my story that he agreed to work pro bono just to see justice served. We spent weeks gathering evidence, tracking down the digital footprint of the offshore accounts, and building a case that would be impossible to fight. I had to live in that house for 30 more days, serving them dinner and cleaning their toilets, all while knowing that I was the one holding the noose. I would watch them laugh at the dinner table, and think about the moment the handcuffs would slap onto their wrists. I found out that the Vances had established a massive foundation for missing children in my honor, and they had never moved from the house I was taken from, hoping that one day I would find my way back. When I finally worked up the courage to call the number on their website, the woman who answered, My biological mother, Eleanor, dropped the phone and started sobbing the moment I mentioned the birthmark on my shoulder that was described in the old missing person reports. We met in secret at a diner 3 cities away, and the moment I saw her and my father, David, I didn't need a DNA test to know the truth. I looked exactly like David, from the shape of my jaw to the way I tilted my head when I was nervous. They held me like they were afraid I'd evaporate into thin air, telling me through tears how they had been told I drowned in a lake during a park outing. A lie orchestrated by a corrupt nanny who had been paid off by Richard. The Vances wanted to call the SWAT team that night, but I begged them to wait. I wanted Richard and Sarah to feel the highest high, before I brought them to the lowest low. For the next month, with my parents' lawyers and private investigators working in the shadows, we built an airtight case. We found the paper trail of the offshore accounts Richard used to funnel the relocation fee. We found the retired nanny who was living in luxury in the Caribbean, and flipped her to testify. We even found the original doctor, who forged my medical records. The investigation went even deeper than I imagined. We discovered that Richard hadn't just stolen me for the money. He had been part of a larger ring that facilitated private adoptions for people who didn't want to go through the legal system. My case was the one that paid the most because the Vances were so wealthy. The sheer scale of the corruption was staggering. The revenge was swift and surgical. My real parents had the resources to ensure the guardians didn't just go to jail, but that they lost everything they had spent my blood money on. We waited until Julian's lavish college graduation party, a massive event where Richard was bragging to his wealthy friends about what a provider he was and how he had raised a successful son despite having to deal with a burden like me. He was literally in the middle of a toast, holding a glass of vintage champagne, when the front door was kicked in by federal agents and local police. I walked in right behind them, flanked by the Vances and a team of lawyers, and I'll never forget the way the color drained from Sarah's face when she saw me standing next to the woman she had stolen me from. I didn't say a word. I just held up the mahogany box. Richard tried to run for the back door, but he was tackled into the catering table, covered in the expensive food I had spent all morning preparing for him. They were hauled out in handcuffs in front of their entire social circle, screaming that they saved me, while Julian stood there in his silk suit, realizing his life of luxury was built on a foundation of human trafficking. The crowd of socialites was silent as the truth was read aloud by the lead investigator. The shame was palpable. Every person who had looked down on me as the help now had to watch as the people they admired were revealed as monsters. The aftermath was a total collapse of their world. The investigation revealed a web of bribery and forged documents that led to Richard and Sarah receiving 25 years each without the possibility of parole. Because the house, the cars, and all their assets were purchased with the money from my kidnapping and the interest it accrued, the court seized everything under asset forfeiture laws. Julian, who had spent his life mocking me for being poor, found himself homeless and penniless within a month because his friends disappeared the moment the scandal hit the news. He actually had the nerve to call me, crying and asking for a place to stay, and I told him he could sleep in the same closet I lived in for 21 years if he was willing to pay me the same rent his parents stole from me. He hung up and I haven't heard from him since. He tried to sue the Vances for emotional distress, but the judge laughed him out of court. He is now working a minimum wage job and living in a studio apartment, finally understanding what it's like to survive on nothing. Today, I am Ethan Vance, and while I'm still learning how to be a son to people I've only known for a few months, I finally know what it feels like to sleep in a bed that belongs to me and eat a meal where I'm the first one at the table. I have a room with windows that look out over a garden, not a dark basement wall. I lost 21 years to a lie, but I gained a future that I never thought was possible for a charity case like me, and I've dedicated my life to helping the foundation my parents built so no other child has to grow up wondering why they aren't loved. We've already helped reunite 3 other families, and every time I see a mother hold her child again, I feel a little bit more of my own soul healing. My biological parents have been incredibly patient with me, understanding that I still jump at loud noises, and that I still feel the need to ask permission before I open the fridge. It's a long road to recovery, but for the first time in my life, I'm not walking it alone. This experience taught me that blood is truly thicker than water, but the family you choose, or in my case, the family that never gave up on finding you, is where your true strength lies. I still have nightmares sometimes, hearing Richard's voice telling me I'm nothing, but then I wake up and see the Vance family crest on my wall, and I remember that the truth always comes to light, no matter how deep you bury it. I am finally living the life I was supposed to have, and though I can't get those 21 years back, I'm going to make sure the rest of my life is lived with purpose and joy. If you think Richard and Sarah got exactly what they deserved for what they did to me, make sure you hit that like button right now to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of justice being served, and I really want to hear your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Did I go too far by letting them host that party, or was it the perfect ending? I'll see you all in the next story.